Welcome to Turning Back the Pages, the podcast where children's book authors discuss their favorite childhood books. I'm your host, Allie. Today, author Anna Dickson is joining me to discuss her favorite childhood book, Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. Anna Dickson has spent many years working in children's ministry, learning about kids and learning from kids. She's earned her master's in Christian education from Asbury Theological Seminary, where she developed her love for writing for families. Anna now lives in Birmingham, Alabama, with her favorite people, her husband and 2 daughters. So welcome, Anna. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
First thing that we are doing is I have challenged Anna and myself to just give a recap of the book that we're discussing, Little House in the Big Woods, in 1 minute. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to let you go first. I have a timer starting in 3, 2, 1.
All right, Little House in the Big Woods is the first book from the Little House series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. It's an autobiographical book about Laura's childhood, and there are actually 9 books total, but this is the first one. And Laura was born in 1867, and so this is said to take place in 1871 in what they call the Big Woods of Wisconsin. So she's about 4 years old, and Laura is known affectionately as America's original pioneer girl. And so this book follows her and her family's move to the Big Woods of Wisconsin. And basically, when you think of pioneer days, they did it all. So from covered wagons to log cabins, hunting for food, making everything from scratch. Even like the threat of bears and panthers in their backyard, you name it, they did it. And so this is just a sweet story that shows different moments and memories that she has from her childhood at that time in her life.
Perfect. You did it in 54 seconds.
All right, just made it.
That's awesome. I love hearing how different people recap. I took a little bit different approach, and that is great. You gave a lot of good backstory. Also, I thought there were only 5, so that's good to know that there are 9 stories.
Yes.
I somehow got lost with those last 4.
Yeah, and fun fact, there's actually other series that cover her daughter's life and her mother's and grandmother's and great-grandmother's lives, and those are not autobiographical. They're written by other authors, so who knows how much of it is true. But they're really fun reads, too. So if you're into this book or get into it from this podcast, then you should definitely check those out, too.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to give myself the 1 minute timer, and I'm just going to talk about Little House in the Big Woods. So here's go, 3, 2, 1. So Little House in the Big Woods is about a family. It follows the stories of Ma, Pa, Mary, Laura, and baby Carrie. And this particular book follows them for about a year. It starts when they're prepping for winter. And there are lots of stories. It's just each chapter is just a different story, a little snippet of their life in that year. So there's lots of stories about panthers and bears, stories from Paul's childhood. There's a lot of family time together, prepping and sewing and preparing food. A lot of Laura learning to do kind of like the adult things. A lot of their time that isn't in preparation is spent telling stories, and lots of songs on the playing the fiddle. I listened to the audiobook version, and they actually sang every... Oh, I ran out of time. I'm going to finish my story there. They actually sing in the audiobook version.
They do, yes. I listened to that as well. It's quite entertaining.
Yeah, that was super fun. I also let my oldest daughter, who's 6 years old, listen to it, and she is obsessed with pretending there are panthers everywhere now.
I'm glad that didn't scare her, but that it was a fun thing for her.
Yes, I know. We were driving to Bible study the first time we were listening to it, and I was like, oh no, this is going to be bad. And she just kind of like hyperfixated, like, that is so cool.
That's awesome. I like her.
I don't remember reading these as a child at all, and so it didn't really jog any memories. I remember watching the series a little bit. And I generally, like, this would have been right up my alley as a child. I mean, I spent so much of my time pretending to prep, gathering like acorns and leaves and pretending to prepare. But I don't remember this one. I have a little bit of background, and Anna, you told me a lot, and I have a little bit of a quiz, and I think you're going to ace it.
Okay.
So, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote Little House in the Big Woods. She was born in the Big Woods region of Wisconsin that became the setting for this book. She was the second of, do you know how many children?
4.
Okay.
Sorry.
5 children, but
5.
one died. So I'll give that one to you.
Okay, thanks.
Her books are mostly based on different aspects of her childhood. Laura was at age 16. She took what job?
Oh, I don't remember.
She was a teacher, but only for 2 years when
Okay.
she married, and she did not like it. I think they said it was 3rd grade that she taught, but I'm not sure if that would be like the equivalent to like what we would call 3rd grade now.
Right.
Her husband called her what nickname?
I was going to tell you his name. Okay, let me think.
You can tell me his name.
His name is Almanzo.
Yes.
This is just a fun name to say.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? What's funny? All these questions, I'm like, I remember them from the TV show and from the books, but they're just not coming to me. So you're going to have to tell me that one too.
That's fine. So she called him Manly, and he
Manly.
called her Bess because his sister's name was Laura, and he didn't want to get them confused. Which is,
That's funny.
it sounds like a very man thing to do. It's very cute. They had 2 children together, Rose and a son who died a few days after birth. Their first married days were difficult because of disease, a couple of fires, and debt. They moved to Missouri, and there Wilder had a regular column at the Missouri Ruralist called As a Farm Woman Thinks. She also had a job at the Farm Loan Association, and she gave small loans to local farmers. So who was it that encouraged her to improve her writing skills and expand her writing? It was someone in her family.
I would say her dad, but I don't actually know that. But I just know they had a strong relationship.
So it was her daughter Rose, who also was a writer. I didn't find much on what she wrote.
Yeah.
Do you know much about what she wrote?
I actually Googled her randomly because I don't even remember why, but it was in preparation for this. And she just did a lot of different things. Sounds like she moved around a lot and covered some of the war as well that was going on during the time. So she had a very interesting writing life.
Wilder first wrote a book called Pioneer Girl, which apparently is a much darker, grittier version of the children's books that we know. So it wasn't published until later, and with the help of Rose, the book was reworked into a series of children's books that we know, the first of which we are discussing today. So the last quiz question, do you know the original name of the manuscript for Little House in the Big Woods?
Ooh, I don't, but I'd love to know what it is.
Okay, it is When Grandma Was a Little Girl.
Oh, that's cute.
It is cute. I like it because a lot of it talks about when Paul's always talking about like when Grandpa was a little boy and stuff like that. I thought it followed a theme, but overall, I guess Little House.
Cute. It doesn't roll off the tongue as easily as Little House, but I think that's really cute.
All right, we can dive into discussing the book. So Anna, I want to hear about your memories about first reading the book.
I started reading the books when I was around 8 years old. And actually, my mom was the one who read them to me. And I think it's kind of funny going back and reading this book as an adult because I knew, like, if anyone were to ask me what my favorite books were growing up, this is the series that I would talk about. But I don't really remember a ton of it. So I was like, I need to go back and reread the book before the podcast. And what's funny is, as I'm reading it, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I thought to myself, I'm surprised that 8-year-old Anna was into this book because it can read a little slow, you know, at times. I mean, there's a whole chapter dedicated to how Pa would clean his rifle at the end of the day and restock it to go hunting the next day. And so it was just kind of interesting to think, like, I wonder what was in that made me want to keep reading it. And so, I mean, there are also a lot of stories that I really resonated with and loved, but at times it can feel a little slow, especially for kids. And so I was just thinking back to when we first started reading these, my mom and I together, and I think a lot of it is just the nostalgia and the memories of being introduced to these books. So, like a lot of families, I grew up in a very busy family. Both my parents worked full time, and at times they had to work some non-traditional hours outside of, the standard 8 to 5. And I had two older sisters that were busy with school and extracurricular stuff, and I was too. But at the end of the day, my mom would come home and we would hop into my twin bed and get under the covers and get all cozy, and she would read me a chapter of one of these books. And then we just kept going throughout the series. And my mom is such a fun person and she loves reading. She loved it as a kid and still reads now as an adult. And I think with a book like this, you can, as a parent, you can sometimes try to be like over educational with it. Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's historical. Let's read about this and learn and see what, we can get from it. But that wasn't really how my mom did it. She just kind of called these books for what they were. And I remember reading the part about how mom was making butter. And my mom was like, that is a lot of work. And we would just like laugh about it. And then there's one book in the series called The Long Winter, and I think it's the sixth book in the series. And it's honestly, it's just such a hard read, especially for kids, because it's just so miserable. It's the winter just goes on and on, and people are getting sick, and it's just horrible. But we had to read it, because it was in the series. And rather than trying to make it something it's not, my mom would just like jump in my bed and be like, all right, you ready to read the miserable book again? And we would just laugh, but like we were so into it as well. And we like, we're like cheering for them to get out of this horrible winter. And so I think her reading that with me are some of the memories more so than the actual content of the book. But when you have someone who is really invested in making sure that you read, especially if it's a parent, that can really play a role in how much you love reading and how much you love books. And you talked about the audiobook of Little House in the Big Woods and how the lady who's reading it sings the songs. And that was also my mom. Like we would get to the pages where it has like a few lines of pause song, and most people would just like read them and move on. But my mom is like making up tunes and clapping her hands and, just being so fun about it. And so those are a lot of the memories that I have. And as I kind of reopened this book to read and prep for this podcast, that's what came flooding back to me, were all of those memories. And so I just think it goes to show that parents, like what we read to our kids and how we engage them in the reading of a book, can really stick with them, and can take something as mundane as a chapter about, cleaning a gun to go hunting to provide food for your family and make it actually really.
Yeah, I love that. So you said your mom still reads. Is it like a
Mhm.
big reader? Were you a reader as a child?
Yeah, I was. I loved reading as a kid, and I think with these books, part of that was, just the experience that I had with my mom. But I think also what makes these books so interesting as a kid is there's kind of an imaginative aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what I was drawn to as a kid as well. There were a lot of books that I was reading that, were just in these magical lands and everything ended up happy in the end. And they were just like really great stories. And that, isn't always the case with the Little House books.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of things that are in there that, Laura and her family lived at such a different time than I did growing up in the 90s, or my kids do now, that you almost have to use your imagination a little bit. Like when they talk about how, Pa would build different things. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. And they're like giving you such detail. And you're like, okay, I really have to like focus and like have some imagination here. And so, and even like, Laura and Mary playing in the attic, they are harvesting all the vegetables and preserving meats to put up in their attics so that they can save it for the winter, and that they won't go hungry. That became like their like play area. And Laura's doll for most of the book is a ear of corn. And there's just kind of like so much differences in the way that they grew up and we do, like it's almost fantastical in a sense, if that makes sense, because you're having to use your imagination to go there, but it's still really fun. And so I think those are themes that I loved as a kid growing up reading any book, but then being able to put those in sort of a more of a historical book was something I really enjoyed.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't have any memories of reading this particular book, but it very much mimicked how I played
Mm-hmm.
and that imagination that I took into playing, which is just interesting that the gathering and the preparing and all of that was how my friends and I played, which is, I don't know, there's something interesting about about using our imagination in that particular way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think same for me. My grandmother, her home sits on a large plot of land, and that's how my cousins and I played. Was in the book here it talks about how Laura had a tree that was her pretend house, and Mary had a tree that was her pretend house, and they would play underneath the branches and go back and forth. And that's exactly how my cousins and I played growing up. And we would collect acorns and pretend that we were going to a store and that was our money, or we'd be making soup with like walnuts and twigs and whatever else we could find. And so I think that's what's cool about this book too, is that there's the element of, yes, this is so far removed from a lot of, what modern day looks like for us, that you do have to use your imagination. But at the same time, like, kids are kids, and it doesn't matter if you're, growing up in the 1870s or the 1990s or current day. Like, we're all kind of playing the same games when you set us outside. And I think that was something that I could really relate to as a kid, and even, playing outside with my own kids today. Like, we did those things as well. But there's just something like super innate in all of us that just loves being outside and finding ways to play. And that's really cool to see that surpasses generations.
It really does. Think back to my childhood. I can see my tree, my house tree, and the different areas of we had. So I moved around a little bit, but the house that I remember, like late elementary, there was a lot across the street, and I can picture it. And I remember going back and showing my husband and being like, "This is the lot," and he was like, "This is so unmagical," but it carries all those magical memories for me.
Yeah, that's sweet. Yeah, because through the eyes of kids, they just see everything as an opportunity for play,
Absolutely.
And so what could be a mundane tree becomes this magical place. And that's just super special and really cool to read about through her eyes, too, since she's kind of writing from the perspective of the preschool age that she was when all this took place.
Right. And for some reason, going into the book, I thought she was older. So when she celebrated her 5th birthday, I was like, oh, this kind of makes a lot more sense. Mm-hmm. And I saw a lot of her really excited to be doing things that her mom was doing. Like, I think she milks the cow and is just very excited about doing that. She's like proud of herself, and that's such a thing that I see my girls, especially my 6-year-old, getting excited about, like the very mundane housework, like vacuuming and unloading the dishwasher, and just everyday things. I mean, don't get me wrong, they still complain about it when it's like a have to, but if it's a get to thing, they feel very adult doing it. And I saw that throughout this book, Laura just being very excited about participating as part of a family.
And it's funny too to see, there's a couple moments in the book where her older sister Mary gets to do things that she's not allowed to do, or they kind of bicker back and forth about something. And it's fun to see, like, I mean, as a parent, when my kids do that, I'm like, can y'all please stop? But it is, encouraging to see. That's also just something that's so relatable to, like, read about the two of them. Like, there are moments that are really sweet, and there are moments where they're just fighting like normal kids. And it's funny that she remembers those and felt the need to put them in her book. That it wasn't all just, this magical playing outside, living in a log cabin, like, fun kind of thing. But there's some realness, even from a childhood perspective, of just, the hardest thing of her day was that she got disciplined and Mary didn't,
Right. That's a conversation literally I had today with my oldest of why she got disciplined and the little one didn't. There's
yes, we have that a lot.
Today's episode is sponsored by, just kidding, Turning Back the Pages doesn't have sponsors yet. But hey, while I have your attention, if you're enjoying this episode or you enjoy children's books and want to hear more, would you hit that subscribe button? Go ahead, I'll wait. Bad music just has a few more seconds. Great job, and hey, thanks. So as a child, what themes stood out to you, and why do you think they stood out to you?
Yeah, I think the first one, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but is just the simplicity of their life. Obviously, it was an incredibly hard life, and I don't think that I would trade the comforts of today for the risks and, like, the hardships that they faced in their day-to-day. But there is something to be said for the simplicity and just like the contentment that they had within their lives. And so I think that's something that like again, I'm not in my backyard building a log cabin to live in, but I think that we can definitely learn from them just like the simplicity and slowness of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And from Laura's perspective, that just the smallest things could be such big things. Like in the chapter where they go to town for the first time and she gets a tiny little piece of candy and she doesn't even eat it because she just thinks it's so beautiful. And so she hides it when she gets home. Whereas today, a treat every day is like not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
Or just the simplicity of like their home and even just like their gatherings, like they to go to someone's house was like such a big deal. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
chapters talks about that when the weather starts to warm up and they're able to go and to like visit people and what a celebration that is. And it's not marked by busyness or, oh, we have all these things on our calendar, but the few things that are on their calendar are celebrated. And so I think that that's something that I recognized as a kid. And I think that's probably something that drew me to the books as a kid. I wouldn't have been able to say like, oh, simplicity and contentment, as an 8-year-old. But I think looking back and feeling the things that I felt, 20 something years ago when I read this, those are two major themes that I think felt like comforting, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. And
Yeah.
like, just, it helped me kind of, my mom and I would get in our little twin bed and read it. It felt very cozy and very comforting just to think about that. Obviously, there's a lot of hardship going on, but because it's written from a child's perspective, you get more of the simplicity and the big wins, even if they are really small things to us today.
Yeah, I would like to read her memoir, the original Pioneer Girl, just to
Yeah.
see a little bit of the difference of the harder things. That would be interesting. Okay,
Mhm.
moving on to favorites. Who are your favorite characters, or do you have a favorite chapter or part of the book?
I think if you ask anybody who their favorite character is, this is probably what they're going to say. So I don't think I'm unique in this. But my favorite character is Pa.
Uh-huh.
I think just to know him through Laura's eyes is to love him.
Yeah.
He's a father who had literally like his family's lives on his that he was carrying on his back and their survival on his back. And every day he'd put that gun on his back and he would carry it out and to try to find food for them to eat and to like keep them safe from the panthers and the bears and everything that was going on. And so I think just a lot of what he had going on was for me today like unfathomable, like what a burden that would have been. But at the end of every day he comes home and he picks up that fiddle and he plays for his kids and he gets down on all fours and chases them around the cabin and does things that a lot of dads today do.
Yeah.
And I think when we look back, when we're just looking through like a historical lens, and we look back on this time, I think it's easy for us to think like, oh, people were just much more like rigid or stoic. Or you look at their pictures from when cameras first came out, and that's
Yes.
just not. They were real people too, doing real things, and they were real dads. And so I think just seeing him provide in such a way, and at least Laura never recalls him complaining, or anything like that. And then to come home and just pick up the fiddle and play with them as if there were no cares in the world. I think it's just a really special character to look at, especially for that time in history.
Yeah, I found him to be very tender for a what I picture to be like a manly man who,
Yeah.
is providing in a very, physical labor type way. And then I loved his stories, and the time that he took to tell each of his stories. And just the way that she was able to tell some of them in such detail makes me think that she in real life probably heard them a whole lot, which I love. Like that's one of my favorite parts of childhood was hearing my parents and grandparents' stories just to get like a fuller context of who they were. And there are a couple of times that one of the stories he told was about Sundays, like Sundays when
Yeah.
his father grew up, when he could have easily just spanked Laura and moved on, that he spent the
Hmm.
time to tell this story. And I don't know. I found that so tender and very sweet that he used story to relate, and I remember my parents did that and always enjoying that.
Yeah, I remember being, around Laura's age, maybe a little older, and my favorite thing to do was to go to my mom and be like, "Tell me a story of when you were a little girl,"
Mm-hmm.
and she would tell me the same like five stories over and over, and
Yeah.
we still talk about them and laugh about them and wonder where those people are now, But I've noticed my daughter is doing it too, and she's 3.5, but she's just now grasping the concept that like I have parents and that like I went to school when I was a kid and that
Mm-hmm.
I had this whole life before her, and it's a little confusing for her, but she's trying to put the pieces together. And so she started coming up to me and saying, "Tell me about the school you went to," or "Tell me about when my grandparents were your parents," or "Tell me about these things." And it's just really sweet to see that every kid asks those questions. And I think today sometimes we can feel like rushed or like we don't have as much time to sit down and tell those stories, but we're really just filling that time with other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just a good reminder to see, Pa could have been like, "Hey, I've had a really long day out there trying to find food to keep you guys alive, and I didn't have any work, and I'm just really frustrated. Please just go to bed." But he doesn't do that. He goes in and he pulls them up on his knee and he tells them a story and lets them engage with him and ask questions. And I think that's like such great parenting from over 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Yes, my daughter also, she is 6 and my oldest is 6, and she asks for stories if I ever got into trouble. She wants to know because she is a little bit of a mischief maker, and so she always wants to hear about when we got in trouble.
But yeah,
Here.
they want to know. They want to know everything about our lives from when we were little, and I just think that's really sweet. And like you said, even in this book, Laura hears stories of Pa and his brothers or his his father and their brothers, and what their behavior was like, and they're used as warnings for her. And so anyway, it's great to see just the whole, like, not just the good stories, but anything that can be usable just being passed down.
So, would little Anna be surprised that you wrote a book?
She would not be surprised. I think she would actually be wondering why it took so long. I loved writing as a kid. Even before I could write super well, I loved to just draw pictures, and I'm very grateful I did not illustrate this book. I think everyone should be grateful that I didn't do that. But as a kid, I loved drawing and writing, and would just get like a little legal pad and rip all the pages off and ask my mom to staple them together,
Hmm.
and write little books. And even I was even thinking about when I got old enough to really write and to really read, novels, and so like later elementary, middle school age, I guess. And I every summer my mom and I would go visit her sister, my aunt, in Georgia, and we would stay for a week or two. And they had a TJ Maxx in her town, which I'm from a very small town in Tennessee, and we still do not have a TJ Maxx. So it was a big deal to be able to go to the TJ Maxx every summer. And they've got like little notebooks that are just cute and decorative or whatever. And so I would buy one of those, and I would spend however long we stayed with my aunt just writing stories and making things up and trying to be the youngest kid to ever write a novel or whatever. And it never happened. But the exercise of writing was there, and the desire to write was there. And I think when you start entering into adulthood, you kind of let a lot of those desires that you have as a kid kind of fade away because they don't seem as reasonable or manageable at that time. And so then it happened, and it came in the form of a kid's book. But yeah, I think I never necessarily set out to be a writer or an author, but I know that Anna as a kid would just be so happy that it actually happened.
Oh, good. Tell me about your book.
Yes, my book is called Letters to My Friends, and it's a picture book about Paul's letters to the churches from the Bible. And it basically takes a main theme from each of the letters that Paul writes and puts it in kind of like a sing-song, rhymey way. It makes it more approachable for kids, and just kind of helps them find at least one major truth and main idea from each of Paul's letters to kind of start building their knowledge on. And it's illustrated by Rory Scroggins. She, throughout this process, has become a great friend of mine, and has just done beautiful artwork for the book. And yeah, I'm so grateful that it's out there, and I hope that it's a resource that kids can use, but also adults can use, as a way to kind of start building a foundation for Paul's letters, because I think that's one thing that with kids, we tend to talk about Paul. We talk about his conversion story, and we talk about how he might have had, some missionary journeys or a shipwreck or something like that. But we don't really get into like what the letters actually mean. We just say that he wrote some letters. And then you get to be, in high school or maybe young adulthood, and then people are like, okay, get your Bibles out. We're going to study the book of 2 Corinthians. And you're like, I didn't really learn anything between the conversion story and this like Bible study that I signed up for. And so I think that's just a big pocket of scripture that we have kind of left just for people to kind of just learn whenever. And I think being able to say like, hey, kids can actually understand more than we give them credit for. And so let's take something that's might be a little hard and definitely long. It's a huge part of the New Testament, and bring it down to a kid's level so that they can start to kind of sink their feet into some of the main ideas of these letters. And for parents who, like myself, woke up one day and thought, I don't really know the difference between Galatians and 2 Thessalonians, and how that feels like such a monumental feat to just like sit down and figure that out. But I hope that as parents read this book with their kids or grandparents or babysitters or whoever, and that adults will also be able to say, hey, I think I'm starting to understand, and be able to differentiate between the letters, because we tend to not ask for help as adults. If there's something we don't understand, we tend to just think, oh, I'll wait until someone writes a book about it or there's a sermon about it or something like that. But I hope that this book is a good tool that's helpful for adults as well.
We have loved it. I saw it at the Little Professor one day, and it was right after I feel like all of our mutual friends from Brook Hills posted about the book. And I was like, what is this book? I've gotta read it. So we've enjoyed it so far.
Well, thank you.
Okay, with the 3 minutes that we have remaining, do you want to share where people can follow you, buy your book, or anything else that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so you can learn more about why I wrote the book. I know I just kind of gave you a quick synopsis, but if you want to read more about that, I've written more about it, and you can find that on my website at annadicksonbooks.com. That's ANNADICKSON. Dickson is not spelled with an X. We get that all the time. And or you can follow me on Instagram at anna.h.dickson, and you can just learn more of the story behind why I wrote the book and what my hope is for the book. And also on my Instagram, you can get the link, direct link to my website resources page. And last week I released some summer stationery. So part of my book, Letters to My Friends, is also trying to encourage kids to write letters to their friends.
Oh, I love that.
And remind them that Paul was a real person, and these letters seem really big and heavy, but they're actually just kind of check-ins and encouragements. Even if he's writing to a church that is kind of straight, or he's writing to a church that maybe doesn't agree with some of the teachings that he said, or he's writing to a friend that has made a bad decision, it's all in the name of encouragement and trying to turn them back to the Lord. And so with our own kids, if they're struggling to forgive a friend, or if they're struggling with something that happened on the playground the other day, or if there's nothing wrong, but they just want to reach out to a friend and say, hey, I'm thankful for you. Summer especially is a great time to get out your stationery and write like a pen pal summer kind of thing to a friend. And so you can find, it's a free download of stationery for the summer, and it actually has artwork from Letters to My Friends that my friend Rory did on stationery. So that would be something fun if you're looking for a way to get your kids a little more creative and reach out to some of their friends this summer. You can find the link for that on my Instagram.
I love that. We're going to be downloading that later today.
Thanks.
All right. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been really fun. For everyone, thank you for joining me in our first episode of Turning Back the Pages. If you have any author suggestions, please feel free to email me at whatallywrites@gmail.com. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter at whatallywrites. Allie is ALLY, and don't forget to subscribe.